Well, hello there, everybody. It's nice to see you on this very strange Christmas. What a world away everything must seem. And, maybe for once, it's a good thing. Now, I'm here to reach out a hand in invitation. Please, wherever you are, if you can, sit down, get comfortable. Maybe warm yourself by the fire or the many space heaters you've had to get down from the lot because a visiting relative moans that it's always cold. Anyways, wherever you are, let me offer you a story. For isn't Christmas time all about stories? So, if you can drag yourself away from the seventh repeat in a row of the Vicar of Dibley Christmas special, then let me tell you a Christmas ghost story. Oh, and did I not mention it was a ghost story? Well, it wouldn't be a true Christmas story if it wasn't a ghost story now, would it? Now, every story begins with an event, one that usually has some greater impact on the overall lives and well-being of those involved in such an event. Now, for many, these points in time go seemingly unnoticed, as they only weave subtle webs into the fabric of their time on this dear earth. But some, like our story tonight, have a much deeper-rooted, cancerous intent. Born from lies and untruths, and may I assure you, my dear friends, that these are two very separate things. You see, a lie is a deliberate fabrication with no connection to the truth whatsoever. However, an untruth is something related to the truth, deliberately made so close to the truth that even in its falsehood can be easily mistaken for the whole truth, even if such an integral part of it is missing. The tale I'm about to tell you begins in the year 1921, and so happens to end in that year as well. The events unfold in that of a week, if not slightly less. Welcome to the Christmas Zone. I'm sorry, it was too tempting, no. But I'll just get on with it, shall I? As with any story, it helps to have a comprehensive breakdown of the characters involved, who they are, where they stand within the household, and such like. However, I would like to approach this in a different way, if you permit me. Instead of creating a fully fledged spectrum of information for you to divulge on each character, I shall place you in the shoes of an outsider. First, we must set the scene and tell you the events that begin this tale, though maybe not the ones that started it, but we shall come to that in some time. As far as our players know, nothing untoward has happened, and everything that may be out of the ordinary is just a thought on the wind. So then, my dear listeners, let us begin. It was approaching 11:37 p.m. on the evening of December 23rd, 1921. The Great War was still a fresh memory for many, and even the slightest bang of a door or the lightest clink of a glass in celebration can cause those who fought and survived. Some would call them the lucky ones, however they would often be the largest voice in disagreement of this, to freeze in fear as their memories fill with blood, mud, and screams of those they saw wiped away around them in swift and brutal blows. The winter air still frosted the ground around the Allister estate, the frost itself creeping slowly over the grass towards the house as the sun set each day. like the chilling hand of the Grim Reaper himself reaching towards those inside. And every day, up until now, the frost would only ever reach the gardens, climbing slowly as it reached the edge of the windows, only for morn to come again and melt it away. But not tonight. The air was colder than normal, and even the bustling of many a guest in the grand house could not warm the air enough to keep the frost hand of death at bay. For tonight that hand would reach inside the house, and our tale shall begin. For a wealthy estate, the drawing-room where today's celebration was being held stood at a modest size. The 20 or so people who had gathered that night had room to sit and stand, though not all at once with fear of knocking into one another, and all had enough room to carefully tread around the lavish furnishings strewn about the place. The walls were covered in ceiling-high bookends littered with well-worn novels of every popular and unpopular author of the last 200 years. The Allister family prided themselves in extreme literary culture, as if they believed it brought them above even the highest ranks of their friends. I do use the word friends with a touch of skepticism and restraint, as it never truly became clear to me how close his family were with those also of high standing. They mixed and drank and dined with all manner of well-to-do folk, but often felt the outsider, having gained a substantial amount of their wealth by ammunition factories during the war. This is not to say they were born with nothing, certainly not. I'm afraid, my friends, that this story does not contain the admirable tale of a poor family gaining their riches through sleepless nights of hard work and toil, but one of increasing their riches through exploitation of the events that surrounded them. They were outsiders so much as that the other families were born with high riches, and the Allister family had increased theirs to that level over time. Tonight's events were called for by the man of the house, Edward Allister, a twig-thin man with a style consisting of a tight suit. Almost never was he seen in anything less, and certainly never without his tie. Some staff would swear he even sleeps in a specially designed nighttime suit made purely of satin just so he could wear a tie to bed. How much of this is true and how much of this is just downstairs gossip is hardly relevant for tonight, but let me tell you, at the party he wore the tie. When he left the party he wore the tie. Well, when they found him he was wearing nothing at all, and the tie was nowhere to be seen. He stood a modest 5'8", with short-cut, thin blonde hair. His eyes were disappointingly dull brown, so insignificant that one wonders that, if asked, anyone would even remember them. He stood by a small side table close to the big bay window. The curtains had yet to be closed, and he could feel the cold coming in through the thin glass. He carefully sat down his glass of champagne and took a step closer as to pull the thick curtains across. The chill of the air forced his skin to sprout in goosebumps. He grabbed the curtains and began to tug them together. Tug, tug, tug. The heavy curtains sticking to the metal pole, scraping loudly, metal on metal. Just as the curtains were nearly closed, Edward noticed them billow ever so slightly. He looked down and saw that the sliding window was marginally open and a thin layer of frost was forming inside. He brushed it away, feeling the cold pierce his fingertips. Shutting the window, he hastily pulled the curtains the rest of the way across, stepped back, and took his glass from the table, and rejoined his wife. Penelope Allister. Never a harsh look on her face. She was beautiful when Edward met her, and she was still beautiful tonight. Not even the everyday stress of caring and loving of 3 children could take away her glow. Her gentle eyes hid the exhaustion well. She had always stayed healthy. She envied the thin young beauties that danced the night away in the entertainment bars across the country. Edward had even invited their daughter's dance tutor here tonight to perform. Penelope longed for her beauty, often not realizing that she did have beauty herself. It seemed to her that after all these years of marriage she had lost her charm, and that no man seemed to flirt with her anymore. But, for many, this was done out of respect for her standing and family life, as some still found her very much more attractive than they believed her husband did. For a woman of Penelope's grace and stature, a modest amount of respect is required when describing her physical appearance. A professional opinion of mine would be that her charm did not just come from her maturity of looks, but the kindness of her heart, the sharpness of her brain, and the ferocious temper that would snap at any moment should someone dare to threaten her children, as is her right as a mother. This evening she wore a modest and loosely fitted ankle-length dress, dark blue in colour, with an intricate pattern of sequins dotted across her chest. I must admit to you that I am far from an expert in fashion, and therefore are in no way or form qualified to give more than an explanation of length and colour. However, I must assure you that this is not such an integral part of the narrative as to cause confusion of what is happening. The note to take away from this would be that tonight they wear colour, and tomorrow they wear black. Edward lightly tapped his glass on hers. She looked tenderly up at him, as she were a few inches shorter and hunched down slightly, relaxing her gaze across his. My dear wife, please could you add a little cheer to your face this evening? We must show some sort of joy for our guests. Edward spoke through a fake smile, carefully crossing the room with his eyes as if to check no one was seeing through the calm exterior. Please, darling, you must believe me. I am cheerful, just tired from the children. Penelope let out a small sigh. Problems coming with children was a common occurrence, as it is for all parents. They all act as if they're the age of Verity and not their own. It's like trying to herd excitable lambs into a pantry. She took a deep sip of her champagne. It was getting warm now, losing its taste. She had to drink it fast to keep herself from throwing it away. What a waste of a good bottle that would be. Her mind was wandering again, it often did. Though thought upon thought, flinging itself violently into an endless round of Penelope, will you? As he spoke, her mind cleared. She shook herself gently. She said inquisitively, yet softly. My brother, will you go and speak to him? He hates these events, but he knows his duty and does well to attend, though he seems to be standing alone fidgeting again. Will you please go and talk with him? He likes you a lot more than the rest of us here. Penelope sunk the rest of her drink down and placed it carefully on the side table. Of course, my dear, he is family, and if that's what you would like me to do. Her tone was sincere and gentle. It was hard for Edward to tell how truthful she was being. Was her voice covering some small hatred of talking to the man? He nodded gratefully and watched her walk off. He admired her briefly, but turned away again to enjoy the entertainment of the night. Now, to have a graveyard so close to the house was not uncommon for the larger estates of the day. It was intended to be a way to keep those dead and long forgotten close to the family, so that reminders of them would seep into the cracks in the walls, filling the house with memories and the whispers of a past life once lived within those very rooms. As time went on, more and more would the cracks be filled, stuffing every last crevice of the house with words and screams of those snatched from the world. Often some less willing to part than the most. These screams would wriggle and burrow through the walls, packed in tightly with all the whispers, trapped, crushed against the bricks. So they struggle, They push and pull, they tear at themselves to escape and feel the warmth of the air again. And so they do. They burst into the light, cracking the plaster and shattering the plates. But they are still so cold. They are free of the walls, yes, of their tomb, but they are still so cold. No warmth from the sun can cure this aching fear inside them. They miss the crowd. They miss the tightly packed safety of those who came before. And now they must wander, searching for another cavern to rest, never to find what they seek, as more and more take the place that they once shared. It was cold, as it often was in the evening, and Verity had not wrapped up as tightly as she should. Her mother would faint when she saw the mud soaking through the hem of her dress, if she had time between the cursing and screeching. She planned to find Hilda, the maid, before finding her mother. That way she had some chance of cleaning up before receiving a total reprimand. She'd been outside playing far too long, far past the time she should have been asleep by, and she knew that. She also knew the quickest way back to the kitchen was through the graveyard. Now, you would be inclined to say to a child not to fear. The dead won't come back to frighten you, my dear. You are just a sweet girl who has yet to even realize the mistakes she made are nothing more than accidents of a childish mind. Verity told herself this. There is no reason to be afraid. For she had never seen them by the stones before. Only she seen them in the house, and by the lake, nowhere more. They did not frighten her, for when she saw them they only gave a smile and a wave, beckoning for her to come join them and play. Walk into the water. Follow me. It's fun down here. I won't harm you. I'm not him. He's not here. He can't go further than the stones. It were these very stones she stood by now. Only a small, rusting, waist-high gate smashed haphazardly into the crumbling wall lay in between her and the dirt path leading a fair few hundred meters towards the kitchen and the warmth and light of a friendly home. No one else ever saw them, of course. She would play in the garden with the children as her mother looked on. They were never seen by anyone but her, as if her mind had made them up. And that is what Verity told herself in this moment. I made them up. They're all in my mind. There is nothing past this gate, and there never has been. The gate made hardly a sound as she slowly pushed it open. Flakes of paint brushed slowly to the ground, but, alas, it still made no sound. She shut it behind her with a soft clunk, her shallow breathing the only thing to be heard in the now blackish night. The light had gone too quickly. It was much later than she planned. Her mother would be worried if she wasn't too busy worrying into another glass or whatever she could find. The light from the kitchen cast a dull orange glow over the graveyard. Huge shadows, many feet in length, clawed along the ground, stretching their talon-like strands towards the trees. She began to walk forward, more afraid of tripping over and hurting herself, her greys much harder to hide from one's mother. Step. 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 The dirt of the path scuffing against her shoes. At the end of the graveyard there stood a small archway of trees, thick conifers seemingly never to lose their girth. She hesitated ever so briefly. It was hard to see what was behind those trees. The path, you see, curved ever so slightly to the right, blocking the view for a small portion. A favourite spot for the gardener to prune, as he knew it would give anyone a fright when they came round. Everyone was so on edge when they passed through, though for what reason they could not say. The gardener knew not why either. He says that he has never known a man or woman to come back to haunt their own graveyard when they would much rather haunt the house they lived in, if only to see the family they once loved again. For you see, the graveyard holds nothing for them. Well, this is what he used to say, of course. As of late, he had not been so talkative. Many would be quick to say that this would be on account of him now being deceased, but as Verity often assured those around her that had never stopped others talking to her long past her death before. So, if the gardener was right, and he often seemed to be on many a matter of thing, anyone who can grow successfully all manner of vegetables in cold English soil must know a thing or two about the ways of the world. The only people that would be left in the graveyard to see Verity tonight would be ones with no family left to visit, or no family that ever wanted to see them again. Now, I must assume that you're wondering why all things that are creepy happen at night. Well, my dear friends, they do not. But it is much more obvious to those less used to seeing it when things that should not be around occur at night. For example, a man in Victorian formal wear with a long black coat and a tall hat upon his head and great grey mutton chops upon his face. During the day, it's no surprising visage, at most put down to an eccentric, though during the night it is a much different affair. The closest Verity ever got to knowing the events of the world were the quick glances at her father's paper before his early rush in the morning, and of course the wireless. Mother had been practically glued to that in recent weeks. Verity had, on a number of occasions, found her mother sobbing as the evening drew in. Her mother had lived there her whole life. She had sisters once, but she said she hadn't seen them in a very long time. Verity saw them, of course. However, she never stayed to talk to them. They made her uncomfortable, their pale and gaunt faces permanently screaming, but never any sound, as if they knew no one could come to save them. Verity was halfway through the graveyard now. The wind whistled silently through the barren trees, picking up a stray leaf or two and tumbling them around her feet. She thought of her mother's sisters again. She saw them standing at the wall around the graveyard as if guarding something. Verity kept her eyes ahead. More and more appeared, men, women, even the children from the lake, all packing in around her. She finally reached the turn in the path. A chill went down her spine. She should have gotten earlier. With this weather, she'd catch her death out here. As she was about to take her next step, the wind blew the ivy away from a stone just off to her left. Strange, she thought. How could the wind do something like that? She, of course, did not know what we know. That it was not the wind that took the ivy off that stone, as Verity trudged slowly off the path through the soft and mossy ground below. The moonlight began to shine on the recently revealed grave. The letters faintly spelled out. No, it couldn't be. Verity gasped in horror, disbelief, but mostly fear. Her heart sank. She felt sick. And at that very moment, as the thin layer of snow began to cover the hard ground, as the party guests wavered, her father, our dear Edward, who by this point had removed his tie, took one last breath. Now, you must be asking, is there more to this tale? Well, my dear friends, is there not always more to everything? But alas, that is for another time. Until then, hold your family close, for you never know what the dark, cold winds of night will bring. I hope you've enjoyed your little story tonight. I certainly have. Enjoy the rest of your time. And it is my pleasure to wish to you a very Merry Christmas.